I
could just stay in this general area, I'm okay?
Mm-hmm. All the way to Daniel and to the almost to the chair.
I like to wander, so okay. Oh yeah, okay. I'll move the chair in closer.
Okay. There, Joe, you're good there. So from the poster to Daniel's rear, you're fine.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having us. You're probably familiar that we had a little event called the presidential election not too long ago. Well, I'm not going to talk about that. But I am going to talk to you about a president from the past who had a pretty powerful statement that was very short as well. His name was Harry Truman, and the statement was, "The buck stops here." Well, the buck stops here is all about accountability and respect and owning what we do in life. Unfortunately, I believe that that has really taken a beating over the past couple years. And as I tell Daniel's story, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to reveal what happened to him and see where the buck did not stop at the right places and how people really did let their responsibilities go. And then, even more powerfully, we're going to see how these dogs, he and all of them that languish in shelters, yes, can teach us all something about respect and accountability. Daniel was a happy-go-lucky 4 to 6 month old puppy one day walking around Alabama, Florence, Alabama to be exact, and he was targeted more than likely to be a hunting dog. And people down there breed dogs to be hunting dogs, and in the first 4 to 6 months, if they feel they don't make it, they're let go as a stray. So he didn't make the cut. So he was let go as a stray. So there's one place where accountability fell down. Could you imagine being told either you are a doctor or a lawyer or you're nothing? Well, we'd all be in a little bit of trouble, right? Well, that was his fate. Unfair. That's certainly not accountability. However, it got worse for him. He was in a cemetery where there was nothing to do, no food, no water, no friends, no shelter from the elements. And then he was brought into a shelter where it's usually a good place for a dog. But after 3 days, he didn't get a home. And after 3 days in a shelter, you don't get a home, you lose your life. And in different shelters, it's done different ways. In this shelter, in Florence, Alabama, they use a gas chamber. So Daniel was literally packed into a tin box with 17 other dogs. And for 30 minutes, carbon monoxide gas was poured into that box. It is a horrific experience. When the 30 minutes were up, the door was opened, and in every other case where this has happened, all the dogs have perished. Well, 16 of them perished, but Daniel was standing there, wagging his tail. The animal control officer had a job to do. It was to put him back in that gas chamber, but he did not. He instead, at that moment, named him Daniel from the biblical figure Daniel in the lion's den. He then called for help. He risked getting in a lot of trouble. A young man, 21 years old, he risked getting in a lot of trouble. He called for help. Please help me save this dog. He was, in fact, brought, put a blanket over him. They bathed him, but he was wobbly. They didn't know whether he would survive the night. In the morning, he was still there, wagging his tail. They got him vet care, and then he was transported to New Jersey, where he was adopted into my family with, at the time, my 4 other dogs. 5, nice round number, pack. That's what I was ending up with. And little did I know, but Daniel's story was about to take off in an incredible way. Because we ended up on every major news station when he was adopted to my home. We were on the Anderson Cooper show. We ended up flying to different states, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, South Carolina, and California, to do guest appearances, to ban the use of the gas chamber for other animals, and to get adoptions promoted. And it was a pretty cool tour, and it hasn't stopped yet because now we're here with you. But in fact, probably the highlight of it was we were on a float in the Rose Parade a couple years back. And let me tell you, that was pretty exciting. We had media coverage for 6 days. We got on that float and went through the whole parade route. He literally met 500,000 people during that trip. And it was a pretty cool experience. The best of the best was we met a couple celebrities. One of them being Crystal Hefner. I don't know if you know her, wife of Hugh Hefner. She's actually an animal advocate. But they called for me and said, Crystal Hefner wants to meet Daniel. Come quick. Because I was outside where the float was being housed. So I ran inside. I didn't even know who they were talking about. And there was literally an 8-foot bodyguard standing by her, standing by me, looking at me like, don't go near Crystal Hefner. So she gets on the floor with Daniel and she gives her a kiss. And I stood there and did nothing. But that's okay. Daniel got a kiss from Crystal Hefner. But most importantly, he has paved the way not only for many animals to get adopted, but he's paved the way for a lot of powerful lessons in life. And that's what we're going to spend a few minutes talking about. And I think you'll see that this whole issue of accountability, not only did he somehow survive for a reason, because I believe one of those reasons is to teach us all a little bit about life. So everybody here probably loves dogs, animals, or you wouldn't be sitting in front of me. So nothing I say will probably be a surprise to you, but we're going to start with the issue of communication. Because communication is probably one of the most important aspects of everything we do. Arguably, it's the foundation of everything we do. And I'm going to tell you a story about Spartacus. You see your teacher, Mrs. Amato here. She met Spartacus. Spartacus, interestingly, was one day from being put into a gas chamber in the state of Pennsylvania. Ironically, years later, Daniel's influence was to knock out the gas chamber in that very state. So they had a connection and they just didn't know it. But they also have a connection now because they're brothers in my house. Spartacus is also a Beagle mix. But you need to know a little something about the personalities. Because if Daniel was a human, he would be Jim Carrey, Happy-go-lucky, you've probably seen him already. Hey, everything's wonderful. He's telling jokes. Spartacus would be Clint Eastwood, He's a no-nonsense kind of guy. That's the way he lives his life. So they are polar opposites. But all dogs, and Spartacus and Daniel have paved the way for effective communication. Communication is easy when it's something nice, right? If you want to say something nice to me, that's easy communication. But if you have to say something difficult to me, or it's conflict in nature, all of a sudden the communication gets a little difficult, right? Well, one day, there was a piece of food sitting on the kitchen floor, and that's like a $100 bill for you or I, right? So Spartacus and Daniel are going to go for it at the same time, and only one of them are going to get it, and Spartacus gets it. So a conflict takes place. A conflict where they need to communicate, and they bark at one another for all of about 5 seconds. When the barking was over, they walked away, and a half an hour later, it was over. They were sitting together, hanging out. Now, let's dig a little deeper into that. If that were two people who had a conflict, would they have settled it that quickly? I think not. They probably also would have texted it to their friends. They might have put it on Instagram, I don't know, Facebook even. And then it would have escalated, right? Dogs teach us something very powerful about communication, especially in a conflict. Deal with the issue one-on-one. Deal with it sooner rather than later. Don't tangent into other issues. Stick with the issue. And when it's over, be friends again. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? But dogs that are dying in shelters, teach us that level of accountability and communication. Because a half hour later, they were lying down together, hanging out. It was a done deal. They weren't going to harbor it any further. And that's one of the beautiful things that dogs can teach us about accountability in communication. But it doesn't end there. Because the other thing that dogs are big on eating. So the other things that they do very well is they feed each other very well. And they feed us very well too. Now I'm not talking about physical food here as much as I'm talking about emotional things. So now I'm going to tell you a story about a dog actually from the 1800s in France. You see, because this dog lived with his owner, and his owner one day decided he didn't want the dog anymore. So he rode the dog out into the middle of a large body of water, and he tossed the dog overboard. Pretty cruel. The dog, being eternally loyal, swam towards the boat, wanted to get back with its owner. Every time the dog got back towards the boat, the man continued to push the dog into the water in order to kill him, to drown him. And this went on until the man got so flustered that he stood up and he fell overboard himself. And the man couldn't swim. And guess who saved him? The dog that he was trying to kill saved him. That story took place in the 1800s. A lot's changed since then. But dogs' loyalty hasn't changed. Dogs' ability to forgive hasn't changed. Not one bit. There's accountability. There's the power in dogs. This dog being one that was being given up for dead, no different than this one was. But I'll bring you back to today, because yours truly, I had some serious, and still do, battles with anxiety and depression. Now I'll tell you a story about a dog named Shelby, because Mrs. Amato also knows a lot about Shelby. Shelby was possibly a bait dog for fighting, especially because of her wounds that she had, both emotional wounds as well as physical wounds. But after she was survived whatever abuse she took, whether it was that or something else, she was tied to a Shell gas station fence, hence her name, Shelby, because she was left there in the winter of 2009, and she was left there for several nights before the Bloomfield Animal Shelter was called. Shelby was in the shelter, and the shelter is a good place to keep the dog safe, but it's jail for a dog. Dog doesn't like it in a shelter because they want to socialize. They want to smell things. They don't want to be in a steel cage with a cement floor. Some of them actually get very frustrated. Shelby got actually depressed. Well, I used to go there because at the time I was in a job that I didn't want to be in, to be honest with you. And my sanity was to leave that job every day and go walk Shelby. Well, I got to fall in love with Shelby, and I wanted to adopt her. But we had other dogs in my house, so I had to convince my wife. So at the time we had 2 male dogs and a female dog. Shelby being a female dog, I said, well look, I'm all about evening things out in the house here, so how about we have 2 females and 2 males? That was supposed to be something you thought was funny? Supposed to think that I could sell, water in the desert or whatever that saying is? Well, in fact, it worked. What I didn't know was that Shelby had to have surgery on both of her back legs because of whatever she endured. So bad that she had to have reconstructive surgery of her ligaments and plates and screws put in there. So she needed a year of rehab. But during that time, I noticed something about this dog. I noticed that she had, in spite of the way she had been treated, she had a compassionate way about her that just blew me away. And I'm sure Mrs. Amato can attest to it as well, having met her.
I met Shelby when she was in the shelter, and she was so scared and so sad and so withdrawn, and I knew Joe, and when I found out Joe was going to adopt her, I said she's going to have a great life. She's really going to come out of her shell.
And in fact, she did. And in between her surgeries, she tested for her therapy dog test, and she passed with flying colors. She is now in what's known as the twilight of her career, As a matter of fact, she is getting ready to retire because I think she's about had enough. Otherwise, she would have come here today and you could have met her personally as well, but instead you have to see her picture. And this is Shelby. Now what you also need to know is that when you are stricken with anxiety and depression like myself, it's not an easy road. Shelby saved my life, and I can tell you that definitively. So this dog, and I'm going to tell you a few more of her stories in a few moments about what she's done as a therapy dog. Well, let me tell you, for a dog who was treated so poorly, for a dog who was abused by humans, to now turn around and serve humans and offer that type of forgiveness in her heart, that is an incredible story of accountability and respect. And that's why I continue to say that we save them, but they could also have the ability to save us. Maybe one day you'll get to meet Shelby, but I think the right thing to do now for her is to cut her back. I wish she could be here in person, like I said, but she, in fact, has had a great life as a therapy dog. Now, there's another thing that we have in terms of accountability, and I'm going to say for the second time that I'm not going to talk about my opening about this current presidential election, but what I'll do instead is talk about a kind of a component, it's called I did what, owning up to what we do in our life and being honest about what we do in our life. And dogs can't lie, but I believe that they wouldn't lie even if they could. So I'm going to take you back to Daniel and Spartacus. Jim Carrey and Clint Eastwood, as I explained. They're quite a team, though. So I want to tell you a story about one day I go to the gym every morning at the same time. And one day I was leaving the house to go to the gym, and there was an apple pie sitting on the kitchen table. Now I took note that the apple pie was sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. So Daniel maybe could get up to it, but Spartacus is a Beagle Dachshund mix, and he's got short legs, so there's no way he could get up there. So I thought nothing of it, and off I went to the gym. When I came back from the gym, I usually am greeted by 4 dogs right at the doorway. I was not greeted by any dogs. I found this odd. Something must be going on. So I have a little dachshund. Her name is Greta. She's only about 8 or 10 pounds. She was off on the couch, sitting there, as if to say, I had nothing to do with this. Shelby, who is probably as perfect as any dog will ever be, yes, I'm biased, she was sitting near Greta, and she was sitting there as if to say, please don't get too mad at what they did. And then there's they. Daniel had powdered sugar around his nose. The pie plate was sitting close by. And Spartacus, who's got a brown-black muzzle, he was covered with powdered sugar. And he was sitting there looking at me, and so was Daniel, and there was no scorn whatsoever. It was fine in their minds. Nothing had happened. But what they did not do was deny it, and what they did not do was point the finger at each other. So that's actually, and you may say, well, dogs can't do that. But we could still learn from that example, because in fact they didn't do that. But somehow they teamed up, which is the good news. They worked together on this. But the best news of all is that, in their own way, they owned up to it. Because Daniel's, his face was down a little bit like this, and Spartacus' head was down. And that's a dog's way of saying guilty. Now, we can go a long way with that story, because that's in fact an important aspect of our life. Important aspect of accountability. And yeah, these are 2 dogs that were given up for dead that taught us that lesson. Now, to do all this in our life, we have to have a sense of consistency. So, I don't like the saying that when I was your age, but I'm going to use it anyway. When I was your age and I was in high school, I was in English class one day. And English was my worst subject. Anybody else worst subject, English? Hey, good. No, it's not good. But it was not my best subject. And the instructor, the teacher, was talking about superheroes. And he was asking a question, he was developing this question, that what is the most important thing about superheroes? Now, since English isn't my best subject, what do we do in the subject that we're not the greatest in? Sometimes we daydream. Well, I was daydreaming. I remember looking out the window. And you know what happens when that happens, right? Because the teacher knows you're looking out the window, right? Teachers are on the side here. They're listening. It's true.
We know.
They know. And I was looking out the window, and he knew it. And all of a sudden, Joe, what is a characteristic of a superhero? And then one of those moments, it just came out. It was just dumb luck. And I said, consistency. And he couldn't say it was a bad answer, right? So he was like, yes. And then he added in, but you weren't paying attention anyway. I said, yeah, but it's still a good answer. And then I got detention. But that's okay, because in fact, even though that was 9th grade and it's just a couple of years ago, my answer was true. And there's no one more consistent than a dog. No one. As a matter of fact, when I came in here, and as you probably now can figure out, I talk a lot in schools and other places, and Daniel comes with me. And as soon as I put that blanket out, and as soon as the people start to gather, he was waiting for that calm. Because they're creatures of routine. They're creatures of consistency. And we know that good habits have to have a pattern of consistency. Unfortunately, bad habits do too. But when we know we're on a good habit, we want to keep them consistent. And that's in fact the best lesson the dogs could teach us. And let me tell you, she may be retiring now, but let me tell you about the consistency of Shelby during the time of her being a therapy dog. She has been in every venue you can mention. She has been in homes for Alzheimer's patients. She has been in senior housing. She has been in schools, special needs schools, where children really were having a hard time, some of them crying incessantly, and Shelby was present 1,000% and did what she was asked to do and did it in an incredible way. But no story will ever top when she did a stint in a hospital during a time where she was visiting oncology every single week. And let me tell you, as hard as that was, I walked out of there every day so proud of my girl for going in there, seeing these very sick people, and doing what she did so well every time. Now, dogs are like us. Some days they wake up and they're just not feeling the best. Some days she probably would have said to me, hey, I need a day off, but absolutely not. Her consistency, her dedication showed through. And one day, we walked into the oncology wing, and the nurse was literally running down the hall to greet us. And she said, I'm so glad you're here. What had happened was a young man, only in his 30s, was dying from cancer. He had gotten to the point where he didn't want to see family, he didn't want to see friends. He was at that point. So she said to me, look, it's a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, Shelby can go in there and spend a few minutes with him, if he's willing. I said, sure, absolutely. And Shelby used to pick up her stride, and I'll never forget it. She used to pick up her stride every time she knew that she was gearing up to do something that she was doing as a therapy dog. And this day was no different. And she picked up her pace as we walked into the room, and as the man saw her, he waved her over. He could not speak. He waved her towards the bed. Shelby came over to the side of the bed, got her front paws up on the bed, and at that moment, she looked in his eyes for a good minute or two. He looked at her, he pet her for that minute or two. He cried, he looked at me, and he mouthed, thank you so much. As I walked out, I had at least 3 or 4 hospital personnel crying in the hallway of joy of what this dog did. That is amazing. That is consistency beyond. That's a hero upon heroes. And let me remind you, this hero was given up for dead herself. This hero was absolutely treated horribly in her life. That's what this is all about. They teach us. We save them. They save us. Daniel is a different personality. Because of Shelby, so many people said to me, oh, he should be a therapy dog too. No, that's not his thing. Remember, he's Jim Carrey. He's the happy-go-lucky one, and he's the guy who's, as somebody once described him to me, he's the celebrity in a dog suit, you know? You unzip a suit, and out comes a celebrity, but that's what he's here to do. He's here to promote what these dogs need from us. So, in my life, I've been down many different roads. And Daniel, and Shelby, taking nothing away from her, but Daniel's story, and especially the way it went down, he was the exclamation point on my life, and that's where I started Daniel's Dream. Because I believe that Daniel does have a dream, and it happened when he walked out of that gas chamber. He wants to see the world a more peaceful place, and he wants to see every dog have a home like he does. So I have a consulting company, actually, that I use to go out and speak and work with businesses. It's called Canine, no surprise, but it's an acronym for compassion, accountability, nobility, inspiring, never be negative, and evolving. And we will continue to evolve. As I started out, the president who said the buck stops here, there's been many presidents since, and there'll be many more. But guess what? A lot of things stay the same. Unfortunately, 4 dogs a minute, lose their life in a shelter. I've been talking for almost 30 minutes. Hope I haven't bored you. But 30 minutes, 280 dogs have lost their life in a shelter just because they didn't have a home. But you know what I think beyond that? I think given the chance, no different than Daniel and Shelby, they could have inspired so many humans. That's why we should rally and do what we continue to do to save them. So that's what I came here to talk about. But guess what? It's all about continuing to evolve. I want to say to you, thank you for your attention. And you could come up and say hi to Daniel after you might have a few questions for me, and I have a postcard for you. Because Daniel's Dream is my rescue, and you can see some great stories on there. I ask you to visit the website. Go on, you'll see, I don't know, probably about 30 dogs on there are current success stories. Every single one of them has enriched the lives of the people that they live with now. And on the back is my website. I'm not as famous as Daniel, but JoeDwyerSpeaking.com, where you could visit and see. I have a lot of podcasts, blogs on there, different subject matters. I also want you to know that Daniel has a Facebook page, and I post on there every day. He has over 260,000 followers. Now, I know some celebrities have in the millions, but I only have a couple hundred. So it tells you why he's followed. But he's followed because he does great things. We're all capable of doing the same great things. You just have to do it with the spirit of a dog. Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions?
I know the top question, Joe, is going to be when can we pet Daniel?
Well, absolutely.
Because that's the most
If
exciting.
nobody has a question, you can do that whenever you want. I'll take that Kong away from him.